Volume 4 C13. Hegemel woke up to find something unexpected, and it was so very unexpected that for just a moment he was convinced. I have not woken up at all, this must be just another part of a dream. He blinked several times, first slowly, then rapidly. However, each time he opened his eyes, the unexpected things were there, staring back down at him in turn. Perhaps I'm dead. What was the last thing to happen? What do I recall? Yes. Father was angry. Again. He hit me, I fell. Then nothing. The memory returned with its unpleasant quivering within his heart. Yes, I must be dead and these two are. Who knows? I should ask. The young dragon thought. It made sense, there was no pain left in his body, no bruises, no broken jaw. If anything, I feel quite refreshed. He realized, and had to admit, being dead isn't so bad so far, and my father isn't here. So that's even better. But then why does the land of the dead look like my room? The two staring down over him said nothing, seemingly waiting for him to give some sign of intelligence or aggression. Excuse me, good sirs. Am I dead? Hegemel asked while his heart skipping a beat suggested that he wasn't, but two smaller beings leaning over a dragon made no sense in the normal world. No. You are definitely not dead. You were injured, quite a bit actually, but I took care of that. Ainz explained in a nobly sonorous voice, a male imitation of what he recalled the draconic queen used when addressing someone counted as a subordinate. I see. And I am a dragon. I didn't end up as something else in another world? Hegemel asked and looked down at his limbs, then shook his head, neck and all. Never mind, that was a stupid question. Who would ever think of anything other than a god doing that? He huffed and cold air spouted from his nostrils. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Ainz mused with a dry roll of his eyes while trying to ignore the proud way in which he felt Demiurge was looking over at him, with his back exceptionally straight and tail fairly bouncing with happiness. So, you healed me. I am myself. In my own home. So, are you not? Not frightened of me? Isn't that the norm for small, two-legged beings? The dragon asked. Demiurge's reaction was such that it caught Ainz off guard. Mote of dust, he hissed and seethed while steam rose from his body between the fibers of his fine suit. A wave of killing intent sprang from his body to engulf the young dragon, bringing about the expected response. Hegemel froze, his body felt stabbed by 1,000 waves of fiery lances. The small, slender two-legged man in a southern-style pinstripe suit with crystalline eyes seemed to grow to many times the size of the dragon's father. The sharp demonic face and features loomed inches away and promised death at the end of long suffering for another displeasing word. There was no other bodily response that Hegemel could offer but the instinctive, reflexive one. His bladder loosened and he pissed on the floor beneath himself. The young dragon cowed like a whipped dog with his head to the floor. You will speak with respect to the supreme being in your presence, or the only noise to ever pass your lips again will be screams. Forgive me, Hegemel said in a tiny, mouse-like squeak of a voice. Demiurge. The lesson is sufficient, Ainz said with a glance over at the archdevil. The killing intent vanished as quickly as it appeared. My lord. Demiurge replied, solicitous again. Forgive my servant, he is zealous about how I am addressed, Ainz said to the now trembling dragon. As expected of a mighty one. Hegemel rasped out as he gave a fresh look over the pair. As all dragons did. He had a keen eye for value, and the clothing the white-clad figure wore seemed to put new meaning to the word priceless. A king, perhaps? Hegemel wondered. I am the ruling monarch of the kingdom of Nazarick. You may call me Ainz Ulgaun. Ainz pulled kingly self-reference pose number 2, placing his spread-open fingers over the center of his chest and giving a very small quarter bow forward with the upper half of his body. I have come to speak with the dwarven kingdom but I seem to find no dwarves. Ainz pantomimed looking around as if there were nobody to be found, and it did the trick. This one is Hegemel, mighty one. And thank you for healing me. Which I also assume means you have no intention of killing me. So thank you also for that. As for the dwarves, they were driven away from here several years ago by the Quagga and my father, mothers, and siblings. Not so much myself, but still, I saw it happen. Hegemel did not raise his head, but he did look up at the pair. The one in the white robes with golden trim seemed to be filled with an almost divine light, the most charismatic figure Hegemel had ever come across. Every word and gesture was profound. Had he not been utterly terrified, he would have stood up and begged for orders. Could he be more charismatic? If so, the dragon could not imagine how. With overwhelming wealth at least, not to mention power, a deadly escort, and his simple presence, Heginmal was on pins and needles waiting for instruction or to be called into the Mighty One's service, his body shaking more with anticipation now than with his prior fear. I see. So they live, but they aren't here. Ainz breathed a sigh of relief as it covered his clearly wrong navigation. Yes, it is as you say, Mighty One. But I know the way to them, and will guide you. If Heginmal hesitated, they were looking at him intently. It was unnerving to feel watched from behind a mask, and through crystalline eyes. If Demiurge asked of the dragon, he watched the creature, fairly daring it to say a displeasing word. If you will accept me into your service, Heginmal hastily replied. I can be of great use. I know everything about the Quagga, and most of what you'd want to know about the dwarves. I've read all about their history and culture. I can lead you to their vault where my father and mothers and siblings are. You would betray your family? Ainz asked, pretending not to have heard the prior incident. Family? My lord, dragons are held together by bonds of strength, if we can be held together at all. My father has no love for me, his mates, or his children. We're just tools. What could be more natural than a child abandoning a family that mistreats them? If I had confidence in my strength I would have left a long time ago. But I'm weak as far as dragons go, so. He hung his head. You saw what marks were left on me. I read with glasses. I love books, not fighting. My father is clever, but has no love of wisdom or knowledge unless it makes him stronger. He feels only paternally enough to have not killed me. But beyond that, I am nothing to him. Not to be spoken to unless I am being given orders. Heginmal felt frankly self-pitying in saying what he did, but having never had the opportunity to say it, holding that all back was a bursting dam. Demiurge listened and felt the world open up beneath his feet as the dragon's life mirrored his own. To be a tool of the supreme beings was one thing, that was as it should be. But he thought back and tried to recall some indication of regard from the one he thought of as father, God, and creator all at once, and the last time he saw the mighty Lord Albert. The black heart of the demon all but broke in his breast. Only one stayed. How am I different in this state? Yes, I am different in body. But in this state, where is my father? Where is he? Had I uttered Heginmal's words as my own, what could I say to refute them? There was one clear and true answer. Nothing. And the abyss of the mountain's depths were as shallow as a puddle compared to the chasm that opened in the archdevil's breast. Volume 4 C14. Ainz felt his collector's instinct rise up, tingling in his spine that led to chills and a hungry kind of avarice. Treasury. Who knows what might be in there? Of course I will have to deal with the other dragons, and those were powerful beings in Yggdrasil. But this world seems very underpowered. Caution must be exercised, but still, this is worth it. He thought, however, the temptation to summon the other guardians. No, I don't want to appear weak. Especially not now, not before Demiurge. Demiurge's mind ran faster than it ever had before, the black abyss of his own singular fear, that he might fail the one who still remained, the one left to give their lives purpose. It seemed to speed his mind up. Like a rock in free fall. He began to make endless calculations about his master's designs and desires. Obviously he intends to rule the dwarves, they are valuable. But what of these Quagga? His master, predictably, was several steps ahead of him. Tell me everything I need to know, Ainz said, and the young dragon quickly proved himself by obliging. My father wants to overthrow the frost giants and rule the mountains. For that, he gathered wives to produce children. And I, unfortunately, am considered a disappointment. But he believes in time that he can create enough of us to drive out the frost giants and secure a home for ourselves. Heginmal explained that, and one thought sprang quickly to Ainz's mind. An army of dragons might be a problem. One rat is bad but easy enough to deal with, but a whole nest is something else again. My father dominated the Quagga people that united under Peri Euro, and they act as his will, dealing with the business of gathering treasure and driving out the dwarves. They are their most hated enemies. Heginmal spoke without hesitation. He might have even been called indifferent, but for all that calm, he never once removed his eyes from either his new master or the powerful servant who seethed with malice just buried beneath the surface. What is a Quagga? Ainz asked. The race not existing in Yggdrasil was utterly unfamiliar. A short race about the size of a dwarf, a little taller maybe, slightly hunched with white fur, sharp claws and jaws. They're intelligent, but before Peri-Euro, they didn't produce much. Their bodies get harder when they consume precious ores, so they used to fight each other. From what I learned from them though, their leader got rid of that old system and put ore distribution into his own hands when he forced their clans to unite. Heginmil stopped when the white-robed figure was holding out a hand palm up. How many are there? Ainz asked. Perhaps 80,000 spread across the mountains, but they've been gathering here for a long while to attack the remaining dwarven cities. There are perhaps 100,000 dwarves remaining. Most of the Quago are already here. In a few months they'll make the last push and the dwarves will die in their last stronghold, Heginmil said, and that brought Ainz up short. His hand slowly lowered, and he asked gently. When you say, here, just what do you mean? They live just outside of this area, my lord. They're not allowed into this inner place, only my father and family come this way, but they're not even a half-hour's walk on two legs. Heginmil said it off-handedly, and Ainz turned an eye toward Demiurge. Yes. Of course. That's his plan. I have to show him I anticipated at least this much or he might be displeased. Demiurge's mind raced for a solution. Quago are less valuable than dwarves but that ability. What if they ate prismatic ore? What if they were made to be loyal? Demiurge asked himself and turned a thought toward the dragons. Frost giants and dragons might both have their uses, but they must be humbled. Both are too arrogant. Thrown into dire straits. His master's plan became obvious, so obvious that Demiurge's heart ached with loathing that it took his tiny mind so long to apprehend his master's profound and deep thinking. Of course. Yes. Master, I understand your will. If you will go with Heginmil, I will begin to settle matters here. Demiurge promised, and turning toward Ainz he gave a half-bow with a joyful smile on his face to disguise the pain that went with his pride. Ainz felt panic seize his mind. Plan? Will? What is he talking about? But Demiurge was plowing full steam ahead. You, worm. The archdevil pointed to the submissive dragon. I will put a delayed seal on your mind. When you leave this place, you will be forgetting I was with our master. You will not resist its placement. Demiurge gave the order and the dragon did not move at all as the palm of the archdevil went down to rest on the scales between the dragon's eyes. Aspect of the devil, forgotten sin, memory alteration. There was only the tiniest glow of magic, and it was done. That will hold just the knowledge he needs to have. If only I could work with memory as well as my lord did, to guide us to such a perfect place for his master plan. The frustration ate at the inadequacy the archdevil felt, but he held his peace. I don't feel any different. Heginmil thought, but that was not nearly as concerning as the fact that the demon in front of him seemed utterly nonplussed by that fact. The touch had been almost gentle, barely more than the weight of an eagle's feather on his scales, yet from just a touch he could feel the overwhelming power that lay within the being. A caress might become the precursor to a new meaning of pain. Heginmil knew it, and from the demon's crystalline expressionless eyes, somehow Heginmil could sense that the demon knew that he knew it too. There are so many scary things in this world. That was the uniform lesson that Heginmil gleaned from the books he read. The Greed Kings, the 6 great gods, and the others, all of them were vastly powerful and smacked around dragons the way adults slapped around children. You're going to see my father, aren't you, Lord Demiurge? Heginmil asked in a tiny, squeaky voice. Yes, Demiurge remarked. Then can I ask one very small thing, for which I will be eternally grateful? Heginmil held the plea on his tongue until the archdevil, more curious than anything, nodded his head without a promise. Heginmil brought one talon up to his own jaw, recalling the last of the many blows he'd taken there, the cracks and breaks, repeatedly having it healed, and asked, whether you kill him or not. Can I ask you to break his jaw before you're finished with him? The request felt supremely right to the archdevil, and in answer to the dragon's question he said a very polite, that can be arranged. Thank you, my lord, Heginmil said with a semblance of serenity slowly coming over him at some small promise of revenge. Then turning to Ainz, Demiurge said, I suppose you will be taking your leave then, master. I will be with you in a few weeks. The panic in Ainz's mind hadn't diminished in the slightest, but it had shifted. How can I? No, I can't disappoint him. He doesn't know yet, and this may make things easier. For a moment, a supreme sense of self-loathing overtook the man who once called himself Suzuki Satoru. If only I weren't such a coward where it counted most. He cursed himself, and stammered out, "Ah yes, of course you understand, Demiurge. I will see you soon." Then with that, Ainz looked down at the still prostrated dragon and said, "Show me the way." Hegemil then rose up from the stone floor and led Ainz out of the room, leaving Demiurge to whatever his work would be. Volume 4 C15. Hegemil and Ainz walked out and remained quiet in their stroll for some time. Ainz couldn't help but feel a little bit claustrophobic within the hollowed-out segment of the mountain. The hairs on his skin stood on end as they walked through the empty city. It was quite beautiful, but notably the glowstones scattered about it seemed queerly placed. The illumination was haphazard at best, casting ample light in some places while being wholly inadequate in others. At least my vision is not seriously impacted, Ainz thought before finally asking as they came to an intersection with no illuminating stones at all, "Why is the light the way it is? I assume these were for the dwarves' usage, but it seems so oddly placed in so many areas." When the dwarves fled the area they took many glowstones with them, but there wasn't time for them to take all, so some were left behind, my lord. Hegemil replied, and they fell quiet again. "Do you know what lies in the dwarven treasury?" Ainz asked, trying to conceal the avarice in his voice. Hegemil almost shrank to the stone beneath his feet again, his head at least, hung in apology. "Nobody knows. One of the first things my father did was have me search for a list or inventory of materials within. I scoured the books. It was the only time he valued them as I do. But other than a few legendary rune-crafted items, some with 4 or even 5 runes, or stories told of more. But other than some specific gear? Nothing. No intact record survives in the capital city. Unless, of course." "Unless?" Ainz asked. "Unless it exists inside the treasury itself." Hegemil answered the question and continued to lumber along. "My lord," Hegemil asked when they entered a more brightly lit area that revealed a long dark column that lay in the distance, a kind of dwarven highway, really just a narrow road wide enough for 2 carts to travel. "Yes?" Ainz inquired. "It really is impressive what they've done, but I don't like the cold. Still, they've done an amazing job using every inch of space. The garden terraces, the well-laid-out cities. A biodome engineer couldn't have done better." "What will you do with me, when you're done with what you came to do here? Will I go back with you, or will you send me elsewhere?" Hegemil asked. "What would you like to do, if I gave you a choice?" Ainz asked the big waddling dragon. "I want to read more books. If I have a choice, I want to go somewhere to do that. If you have a place where I can do that, then I would be overjoyed to enter your service in that capacity." Hegemil replied, his tail actually wagged almost as a dog's might. "I think that can be arranged. I will put you under my dark elf twins. Aura tames magical beasts and would be delighted to have your service. Mare is an avid reader. Serve me well, and there will be more books to read than you could read in 1,000 elven lifetimes." Ainz could make that promise easily enough, knowing that the library of Ashurbanipal was in fact a text file dump from every non-copyright book known to human history. Hegemil began to trot, even skip, not ahead, but around Ainz. "Would you like a ride, my lord?" he asked with happiness overwhelming his heart. A brief flashback came to mind of sitting on Chiltia, but given that this was a dragon, his innate gamer and adventurous spirit took over, and when the dragon flopped down onto the stone, he climbed on. Books, books. Unlimited books. Happy book time. Hegemil's head bobbed back and forth as he went on in a sing-song way and began to trot ahead again with Ainz on his back. Willing obedience versus forced obedience. Ainz thought, and recalled the words of Punito Mo about a Western ruler. What was his name? King Richard the something. ... So Richard went off to campaign in Ireland, and as soon as he, the one everyone was afraid of, was gone, everybody rose up in rebellion and brought him down. He ended up dying of thirst, locked up alone in a room. Loyalty, love and loyalty. Fear has its place, but making myself a ruler revered by my subjects is the best way to ensure I rule no matter how strong I or others are. Ainz reiterated the lesson in his heart, and that turned his mind to Demiurge. He didn't get to answer me before. Perhaps he avoided it. Does he suspect anything? Ainz asked, but he ruled that out. The looks he caught of the archdevil were closer to worshipfulness, though it felt like more lay there than was evident on the surface. This is the problem with the clever ones, you can never tell what's really true about their inner thoughts. Heinz sighed, his heart was aburst with affection for Albert's son, but it was impossible to be unaware of the inner darkness that lay within the Guardian. Heinz tried to remain neutral, but the horrific and brutal conflict between the lizardman and the frogman left its mark, the blood and brutality, the entrails, the screams of horror, the pain. The way the lizardmen rushed through the frogman home slaying everyone they could get a hold of. The retching feeling of vomit coming up was still fresh in Heinz's mind. To secure control I have to play these games. I can't be just a conqueror. But it's a sickening thing to do. I'll have to keep Demiurge under some degree of control however. If I leave it to him, who knows what he will do. It was easy to drift off into wayward thoughts. They passed through the long dark shadows beneath endless miles of stone sky. Occasional lights of glowstones cast their endless brightness over an area only to fade away to nothing minutes later when Heinz left them far behind. Shadow and stone with bits of light became repetitive, interesting as the architecture was from an aesthetic perspective, and what it told him about dwarven society. It didn't get him what he needed. Nor was it enough to occupy his mind. What plan? What plan does Demiurge imagine I've got? Since when has there been a plan? I just thought runecraft was interesting and useful as a product and wanted to gain control over it. Why must they always make me more than I am? His fingers shook so hard that he removed them from Hegemul's back and balled them up into fists to rest them on his own thighs instead. Okay. Think, Heinz. Think. First. We have to find some way to break it to Demiurge about what has happened. I have to minimize any harm he might do, without ruining whatever plan he thinks I have. I've got to form a friendly agreement with the dwarves. And I've got to do something about the Quagga so they don't pose a future problem for me, or maybe even turn them into an asset. Okay. Great, now how do I do all that? You've got time to think about it at least. Heinz felt his fretting diminish as he laid out his objectives in simpler terms, and thought about the blessing of having time to do it. Distant problems were always easier on the mind than present and close ones. Then Hegemul curled his neck around to look back at his rider. My lord. We'll be at the dwarven capital in a few hours. I hope my jogging for a little did not disrupt your comfort, but when you tensed up a few hours ago I assumed you were impatient. Heinz snapped out of his reverie. No. No, it's fine, he said with haste, giving approving nod number 2, a half nod toward the dragon's face. But within, despite forcing himself to relax, all he could think was, oh. Great.